promise. Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Gil Klein. I am the club's president and a national correspondent for Media General newspapers, writing for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, the Tampa Tribune, and the Winston-Salem Journal. I'd like to welcome the club members in the audience today, as well as those of you who are watching us on C-SPAN or listening to us on National Public Radio or the Internet Global Network. Before introducing our head table guests, I'd like to remind you of some of our upcoming speakers. On Tuesday, April 19th, Senator Max Baucus, a Democrat from Montana and chairman of the International Trade Subcommittee, and Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, and a member of the House Foreign Operations Subcommittee, will debate most favored nation trading status for China. Then, on Monday, April 25th, Aung San Suu Kyi, Chief Secretary of Hong Kong, will present a speech entitled Hong Kong, Little Dragon, Big Future. And on Tuesday, April 26th, Bill Malden, the cartoonist, will speak in conjunction with the National Portrait Gallery's exhibit, Reporting the War, the Journalistic Coverage of World War II, saluting the war correspondents who... Transcripts, audio, and videotapes are available for this luncheon by calling 1-800-500-9911. If you have any questions for our speaker, and I certainly trust that you will, please write them on the cards provided for you at your tables and pass them up to the head table. I will ask as many as time allows. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly while their names are read. And please withhold your applause until I have read all of the names. From your right is Peter Blank, assistant editor of the Kiplinger Tax Letter. Joseph Slevin, Washington Bond and Money Market Report, and a former president of the National Press Club. Monroe Carman, editor of the Bloomberg Business News and vice president of the National Press Club. David Beater, Washington bureau chief of the Omaha World Herald. Michael Dolan, Deputy Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. John Richardson, the husband of today's speaker. Skipping over our speaker for a moment, we have Christy Wise, freelance journalist and chairwoman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee. Debbie Decker, Chief, Office of Strategic Planning and Communication for the Internal Revenue Service. Vera Glasser of the Maturity News Service, and the member of the National Press Club Speakers Committee who organized today's luncheon. David Hess, national correspondent of Knight Ridder newspapers and another former president of the National Press Club. Peggy Roberson, national desk editor of Hearst newspapers. And Ben Shore, news editor of the Copley News Service. Now you can applaud. It is only fitting that today, the 15th of April, Tax Day, we should have as our speaker Margaret Richardson, Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. We'd probably have a bigger crowd here today in the ballroom, but let's face it, reporters are used to meeting deadlines, and the deadline for taxes is not until midnight. Also by coincidence, today the American Society of Newspaper Editors is meeting next door at the J.W. Marriott, and at this very moment, all of those editors are listening to Billy Graham, the evangelist. And no doubt Billy Graham is lecturing them on how to prepare for Judgment Day. It occurred to me that if we combine the two events, we could have the three certainties in the life of a reporter: death, taxes, and editors. Mrs. Richardson comes to us at a crucial moment in the life of the IRS. In the lexicon of the Clinton administration, she is trying to reinvent it. As the Washington Post pointed out in the interview with Mrs. Richardson this morning, more and more taxpayers view the tax law as incomprehensible and the IRS as unresponsive. While it collected $1 trillion in taxes last year, it allowed an estimated $170 billion to go uncollected. That $170 billion would have gone a long way toward closing the budget deficit. Mrs. Richardson has promised a simpler, friendlier, and more responsive tax system that is harder to cheat. In other words, IRS agents will be wearing smiley faces when they put you on the rack. Until she was named IRS Commissioner by President Clinton, Mrs. Richardson practiced law as a partner in the Washington law firm of Sutherland, Asbill, and Brennan. For 8 years in the 1970s, she worked in the IRS Chief Counsel's office and later served on an advisory panel of tax professionals to the IRS Commissioner. Former IRS Commissioner Donald Alexander described Mrs. Richardson as mild-mannered, soft-spoken, but tough, which he said she has to be because, as he quotes, "The job is not one for a weakling." As with so many appointees in the Clinton administration, Mrs. Richardson counts First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton as a longtime friend. The two found themselves among the few women working on programs within the American Bar Association. She took a leave from her law firm to work on the Clinton presidential campaign, where she earned a reputation as an effective fundraiser, cajoling money out of Democratic fat cats, or squeezing money out of tax cheats. The two jobs are about the same. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm press club welcome for IRS Commissioner Margaret Richardson.
Thank you, Gil, very much. It's not often that I get such a warm welcome, and I can assure you at this time of the year, it's very rare to have such a warm welcome. In fact, it occurred to me that the press club might be one of the few places where the IRS Commissioner could actually be welcome on April 15th, because I'm pretty certain that the only thing that most Americans dread more than an audit from the Internal Revenue Service is to be interviewed by some of the reporters that might be here today. I'm delighted that a number of my friends could also be here too, and I thought, I understand that there are cards on the tables, and I thought that if any of you have any suggestions or comments about the IRS, you might jot them down, let us know about them. Please put your name and your Social Security number on it, and I do promise you that we'll be following up with you. When I got the invitation to speak today, I had actually assumed the press club had invited me because of my fame as a writer. Now, it might be immodest, but for those of you who read Reader's Digest, the April issue indicated that I am the most widely read writer in America. I'm sure you've read my most recent work. It was the letter in the front page of the tax form. Now, I might be widely read, but I have a feeling Stephen King does not need to worry. Speaking of letters, I have been chided often by my friends and my family for not being a better correspondent. But just last week, I did get a letter from a friend of mine in Texas who complained that I didn't write in the past. But in this particular letter, she said, "Dear Peggy, got your letter. Do me a favor. Next year, don't bother." It is good to be here today. It's a nice break on what is otherwise a truly unbelievable day. Now, I don't know what kind of day you all are having, but you won't believe the kind of day I've been having. Do you know how many phone calls that I and my colleagues are getting today? We're going to have over 500,000. Don't worry, though. We've got over 8,000 people who are ready to respond. When we opened our doors this morning, along with a few protesters on the doorstep, we had over 3 million tax returns waiting for us. And you can add to that another 10 million returns that people are going to drop into the mailboxes before midnight tonight. Then there are another 5 or 6 million who will be getting extensions today, and we'll be getting those in the mail tonight as well. So if you thought today was a busy day for you, think about the prospect of getting over 20 million pieces of mail in the next week. Since this is my first filing season as the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, or the commish, as my daughter likes to call me, this has all been new to me. Now, what I've discovered is that there is nothing about the Internal Revenue Service that is small. We're an agency that has a budget of over $7.5 billion. We have over 115,000 employees. We process over 200 million returns every year, and we handle over 2 billion pieces of paper each year. Now, hearing this may make some of you wonder whether or not anybody should want to take this job. Excuse me, they've asked. Put the mic down. Is that better?
Lower, they're saying lower.
Lower? Lower? Okay. Hearing this may make some of you wonder why anybody would want to take the job, and I can assure you, once I talked to Secretary Benson about the job, he asked me the same question. And I must confess that on the day the decision was announced, I was driving to work, and I questioned my own sanity when I heard on the radio an announcement, soon to be the most hated person in America, Margaret Richardson, was named today by President Clinton to be IRS Commissioner. I must tell you, I was quite startled, because for those of us who've practiced tax law, we've had a very tame and quiet existence, I think. But getting back to April 15th, I'm sure there are plenty of public relations firms that wish their clients had the name recognition that April 15th has. No pun intended, but it can be a taxing day, both for the public and for the IRS. But as I've said to a number of you, I'm from the IRS and I'm here to help. What I wanted to share with you all today are some of the changes that are underway at the service to make this day a little less taxing for everyone, and to give you some idea of how the IRS of the future will look. Now, I'm sure tonight's news is going to focus on all the usual stories about the long lines of people waiting at the post offices to mail their returns before midnight. Now, that story's not new, but what a few of you probably know is that it's been the same story for the past 80 years. The midnight tradition actually began 80 years ago with our first filing season in 1914. That year, according to a front-page story in the New York Times, stragglers were braving a blizzard to reach the Internal Revenue to file their returns. When the New York office heard about this, they stayed open till midnight to help those last-minute filers. And by doing so, our tradition of taxpayer service, I think, was also born. You may not be aware of this, but this is also the 80th anniversary of the Form 1040. Of course, that form has changed a lot over the last 80 years, just as tax collection has. The original 1040 was a one-page form with one page of instructions. So maybe not all changes are for the better. In 1914, 80 years ago, we collected $380 million in taxes, and nearly half of those dollars were from taxes on whiskey. Today, the IRS collects more than $1 trillion in taxes, and not a penny of it comes from whiskey. We don't collect the whiskey taxes anymore. I must say, from some of the comments I heard made before lunch, we may have the whiskey tax up a little bit higher today, before the end of the day. In 1914, we had about 357,000 people who filed that first Form 1040. This year, we'll have over 114 million people filing the 1040s. I must say it's too bad that the $6,500 salary that the commissioner got during that time didn't increase at the same rate. And some of you may be some of the more cynical people may be a little surprised to learn that people actually enjoyed paying taxes back in the early part of the century. One man from the Midwest expressed his joy in the new income tax in a note he attached to his 1914 return. That note said, quote, "I have purposely left out some deductions I could claim in order to have the privilege and the pleasure of paying at least a small income tax." Now, I haven't received any letters like that. And occasionally we do get notes attached to our returns, but the words privilege and pleasure usually aren't accompanied. Now, in case you're thinking that everything was better in 1914, you might want to think again. In those days, the audit rate was 100%. Every single one of those 357,000 filers had their returns examined. If they owed taxes, we contacted them and told them how much to send in. In 1914, a New York Times editorial complained, proving that not everything changes, because I assume you saw the Times article this morning that was entitled "The Cruelest Day of the Cruelest Month." That 1914 editorial said that because we audited every single taxpayer, quote, "We are giving taxpayers the same option that the eel has about being skinned," close quote. Now, I think that metaphor may be kinder than the one about the difference between a tax collector and a taxidermist. which goes something to the effect that at least the taxidermist leaves the skin. Well, let's go back to today. The millions of Americans who have put off contacting us until today are but a small percentage of the people that we serve during the year. The IRS is the one government agency that touches the lives of almost everyone in this country. Some of you may think we touch you a little bit too much, but we do interact with more people than almost every other agency. And I can tell you I'm particularly excited to be able to lead the IRS at this time of major change. It's a time when our agency has come to realize that just like other service organizations, we must listen to our customers, the American taxpayers. Many people may not think of themselves as our customers, but we have pledged to try to meet their expectations and their needs. Now, granted, this is not an easy task, but we do believe that American taxpayers have the right to expect responsive service from the government agencies just as they do from business. They demand, and rightfully so, good value for their tax dollars. And we have been listening to what the taxpayers have been saying, and we've been making some changes to try to give them value. For perhaps the first time in our history, we at the IRS have a clear business vision, a vision of how we want tax administration to look in the next century. Although our business vision will become a reality by the end of the century, many features of that business vision have already been implemented. Our surveys of taxpayers tell us that more than anything else, people want us to simplify the tax law. And believe me, I would if I could. Any law that is complicated for taxpayers is also complicated for the Internal Revenue Service. Unfortunately, we don't write the tax law. We can, however, and we do, try to provide guidance that makes it easier for taxpayers to understand their obligations. What we can do, and what we're trying to do, is to make sure that our forms and publications are written as clearly and as simply as possible. And providing good service, I think, means recognizing the diversity of our tax-paying population and making it easier for every single taxpayer to understand and comply with the tax law. For instance, we provide our tax publications and toll-free information in Spanish. This year, we decided to take a further step with a test offering the Form 1040A and the instruction package in Spanish for taxpayers who live in Southern California and in Southern Florida. I think I've probably received more letters about this test of Spanish language forms than almost any other subject. And as you might have guessed, some of the writers have suggested that we try using English in our next experiment. Meeting our customer needs sometimes does mean going above and beyond the call of duty, as our employees at the Ogden Service Center did. A hitchhiker from out of state showed up at that service center one day to get his refund check. What he didn't know is that service centers don't issue refund checks. So the employees got together. This person had absolutely no money and was really down on his luck. And they took up a collection to help the man make ends meet until the check that they had ordered for him could arrive. Believe it or not, he was so taken with Ogden, he settled down in the community and now runs what we understand is a thriving business there. Enhanced technology is also a part of our business vision, and it is already changing the way we operate. As more and more people become comfortable with today's technology, electronic filing is fast becoming the method of choice for many filers. Electronic filing is clearly an increasingly important part of the way we need to do business. I mentioned we process over 2 billion pieces of paper a year, and I've often said it's a marvel the system works as well as it does when you realize how many pieces of paper go through it each year. This year, we'll have over 13 million filers who've sent us their returns electronically. Not only does electronic filing reduce the amount of paper in the system, it also improves the accuracy of tax returns. This year, the accuracy rate for electronically filed returns is 99.9%. That's about as close to perfect as we are probably ever going to get. But we're also constantly looking at new ways to take advantage of technology. We have a telefile program, which is one example. That program allows taxpayers to file their returns using touch-tone telephones any time of the day or night, 7 days a week. Filing by phone is available in 7 states this year, and we hope to expand the program next year. Telefile makes filing easier, and it means more accurate returns. Last year we had about 149,000 telefile returns, and we've already gotten over 500,000 this year. And I'm delighted to share with you that just yesterday, OMB Director Panetta announced that our telefile pilot will receive the OMB Director's Award. It was an award that was created to highlight innovative initiatives by federal government agencies in the spirit of Vice President Gore's National Performance Review to reinvent government. We're also forging electronic partnerships with state governments. This year, combined federal-state electronic filing is available in 23 states. This program allows taxpayers to file their federal and their state returns in a single electronic transmission. Now, what could be less taxing than having to file just once? Well, not having to file at all is probably better, but we're not ready for that just yet. But barring that, and participating in this joint electronic filing program can really save both time and effort for the taxpayers and the tax administrators. The response we've had to this program has also been overwhelming. We've had more than 1 million people file joint electronic returns this year. As you can see, we're trying to implement many changes to make today, April 15th, 1994, less taxing, and you're going to see many more changes in the future. But for just a moment, I would like to fast forward to tell you how our business vision will change the IRS in the next century. As we move toward reducing paper submissions with electronic filing, we are also streamlining and modernizing the way we answer taxpayers' questions. We're relying more on automated phone systems and less on correspondence. Gone are the days when customers expect to interact with businesses through the mail. The phone call is now the standard way a customer resolves an issue with a business. If your bank doesn't honor your check, you call them up. If your credit card company has a mistake on your account or charges you for something you've never bought, you call them up and clear up your account. That's what we hope to do at the Internal Revenue Service. Technology will also make long lines at the post office a thing of the past, and I think commissioners in the next century won't have to worry about 20 million pieces of mail waiting to be opened in the last week of the filing season. On April 15th, in the year 2001, not only will you be able to file your return electronically, but if at the last minute you suddenly discover you need a form, it'll be available online. And if you don't have the instructions you need for that form, that'll be online also. Virtually everything you need for filing could be on your personal computer at home. Millions of Americans will barely know that there is a filing season. With all the information about their income and credits online, we will be able to compute their tax for them and send them a bill or automatically deposit their refund checks into their bank accounts. By the year 2000, our employees will have online access to all the information they need to answer taxpayers' questions. They will be able to access the taxpayer's tax history instantly on their monitor, including filed returns and correspondence. The paper documents that we do receive, and I think people will still file paper returns, some people will never get used to the computers, will be scanned into our system as soon as they're received. So they will be processed electronically even though they're received in a paper format. You'll be able to call with a question about your return right after you file it and while it's still fresh in your mind. You'll have your answer immediately instead of waiting 2 or 3 months for your return to work its way through our system. But our business vision does go beyond upgrading technology and providing better service to the taxpayers. Surveys of taxpayers also reveal that one of the things they most want from us is for us to enforce the law. You know, Bob Garfield wrote in last week's Washington Post magazine that there was a certain duality that we at the IRS are expected to perform. And I think he was probably right. He described us as, quote, the iron fist in the velvet glove, weighing discretion, judgment, practicality, cooperation, conciliation, and compromise on the one hand, versus scaring the living bejabbers out of taxpayers on the other. And while it's certainly not our mission to scare the bejabbers out of anyone, it is our mission to collect the proper amount of tax. Talking about ways to fool the tax lady is common conversation, at least until I walk into the room. And I think a lot of people feel that fudging a little on your tax return is part of a traditional American pastime. We all know workers who are willing to work a little bit lower rate if you pay them in cash. And who cares if someone's Aunt Myrtle bumps up her church contributions by $100 or so? Well, I care, and you all should too. Not reporting income or claiming deductions that are too high is not without its victims. Perhaps we're not all like the man in the Midwest who was pleased and privileged to pay his taxes, but whether we like it or not, as Oliver Wendell Holmes said, in the words that are carved above the doors to our building, taxes are the price we pay for a civilized society. Now, don't misunderstand me. I think we do have the best tax system in the world. We are the envy of the rest of the world, and I'm constantly approached by people in other governments who want to see how we do administer the law. But we could be better. The compliance rate is about 83%. That means that each year, almost 17% of what should be paid in taxes isn't paid. Now just think about that. 17% of $1 trillion starts to add up after a while. In fact, every 1% increase in our compliance level is worth about $10 billion in increased revenue. We could do that, we wouldn't have to raise tax rates, and we wouldn't have to change the tax law. This money could go to helping reduce the deficit or pay for important programs like helping the earthquake victims in California or fighting crime in the streets. Just 1% would have paid the cost of the California earthquake or for the crime bill. We don't think an 83% compliance rate is acceptable. And over the next few years, our goal is to raise that rate to 90%. Now, I know that's a pretty ambitious goal, but we can't expect honest taxpayers to continue to subsidize people who are not willing to pay. Some people, including some people in the press, have said they don't think we can attain a compliance rate of 90% in this country. Well, I don't buy that. Not only do I think it's possible, I really hope to see us well underway to that goal during my tenure as commissioner. And something else I want to emphasize that is today is that as long as I am the commissioner, we at the Internal Revenue Service are doing and will do whatever is necessary to ensure that those who try to perpetrate fraud on the system by filing fictitious refund returns are unsuccessful, whether they file on paper or whether they file electronically. We have a broad strategy underway to detect and prevent refund fraud in our system. We're working with Los Alamos, their advanced computing labs, and we're placing the resources of the world's most powerful computer to work on fraud detection. Now, if I were about to file a fraudulent return, and I discovered that the people who invented the atomic bomb and who designed the Star Wars technology were on my case, I think I'd definitely reconsider. And that's our goal, to make the IRS such an unattractive target that fraud artists will have to take their business elsewhere. Now, I've told my staff that I hope to stay in my post for the full 8 years. So I do hope that in 8 years you'll invite me back on April 15th, the year 2000, and then I can outline the changes that the IRS will have in store for you to make the April 15th of the next century a lot less taxing for all of us. Now, I know, Gil, that a lot of speakers who come to the press club come with an announcement or some kind of earth-shattering news. I thought announcing that we were extending the filing date from April 15th to August 15th might be a good thing, but you can already do that.
During the summer, too.
And then I thought about letting those few among you who had a tax increase last year pay that additional tax off in 3 installments, but you can do that too. Then I thought about waiving taxes for all of you who are willing to sit through this speech today. But from the looks of most of you, I don't think the Treasury could absorb the loss. So finally, I decided that when it comes to the Internal Revenue Service, for a lot of people, maybe no news really is good news. Speaking of good news, though, we do have 13 million taxpayers out there who are going to be getting some good news next week. We'll be contacting all of the taxpayers who filed and claimed the Earned Income Tax Credit for 1993 to tell them that they have an option of receiving that credit in an advanced way in their paycheck every payday. The Advanced Earned Income Tax Credit allows low-income workers to increase their take-home pay by as much as $102 a month. However, today, fewer than 1% of the people who are eligible actually claim it on an advanced basis. So we're hoping that 13 million people who hear from us will consider this option. It should make life a little easier for them. And for those of you who are in the press corps, I hope that you'll publicize it, because it certainly is a very important part of, or a very important thing for those who are working to have the opportunity to have that money in each paycheck. I hope that what you've heard today will make you realize the IRS really is about change. Technological change, change in the way we go about our job of collecting taxes, and change in the way we view the American taxpayers. We all know too well that a few highly publicized incidents can greatly overshadow the many positive things we're trying to do at the IRS. I think Bob Garfield in his article pointed out very well that however isolated and anomalous such occurrences are, as anecdotes, they have tremendous resonance. On the other hand, I have to tell you, who would have ever thought that you'd read an article called "Why I Love the IRS"? Now, maybe in the not-too-distant future, when people hear, "I'm from the IRS and I'm here to help you," they won't even laugh, at least not out loud. Thank you for sharing this time with, or letting me share this time with you today. I know many of you had never heard of me today, even though you may have heard from me, but I hope by midnight tonight I will have heard from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. The first question is, how did you train your agents and information people to be user-friendly? One IRS fella recently contacted by telephone was a real comedian. And what exactly does user-friendly mean?
Well, I think that we have had a program underway for some time to emphasize that we are in a service business, and we are trying to be responsive to the needs and concerns of taxpayers, and hopefully when people call on the phones, they are treated with courtesy and respect. We can't always make people happy about the answers that we have to give, but people can certainly be treated respectfully and courteously. I think we have a number of people who work on the front lines who are very conscious of that today, and I think that it is the vast majority of the people who really do treat people with respect and dignity. But I think constantly discussing it, and when you're the commissioner, you're able to go around and visit with a lot of people. I think constantly reminding people of that is terribly important. As far as the comedian, I'm not sure, because I don't know what the joke was.
This questioner says, the Washington Post recently ran a story about a man who was harassed by the IRS and even imprisoned before receiving a check for damages. How common is that?
Well, I hope it was an aberration, I can assure you. And I have said repeatedly that the acts of even one individual, unfortunately, do spill, or in the Internal Revenue Service, spill over and affect the image of the whole organization. I believe that was an aberration. It happened a long time ago, not on our watch, and not under our current policy of hopefully being much more responsive to taxpayers.
This question wants to know, how are you going to collect more with fewer people? Aren't you losing many agents and other professionals with early retirements?
We are hopeful that we will be able to maintain our staffing at about the same level over the next few years. We do have an increasing workload, and as I've often said, we are in a growth industry. The number of returns, the size of our population is going up. but we do not anticipate losing large numbers of staff. There are people retiring, but we have good people coming behind them to fill their jobs. So we anticipate having the same size staff to handle our mission of the future.
This question says, as the IRS moves to a more efficient electronic system, how will you prevent invasions of privacy?
Privacy is probably one of the biggest issues and most important issues facing the Internal Revenue Service and any agency that is trying to upgrade its technology. We have recently hired a privacy advocate. I think hasn't started yet, but will be in the next few weeks, to help us as we're designing our systems of the future so that we can build in privacy concerns, state-of-the-art privacy systems into our systems as they're being developed so that we don't have to look back in 5 or 10 years and say we need to fix this. So it's going to be it is very much on our minds, and we have someone there who will be making sure that everything we do as we develop the system will take into account taxpayers' rights to privacy. I've also said a number of times, and I'd like to repeat today, that we won't tolerate even one employee who violates the taxpayer's right to privacy. I think the whole notion of maintaining privacy of taxpayers' tax return information is really one of the underpinnings of our voluntary tax system, and it's why we are able to have so many people, or the vast majority of the people, I think, comply with the law. And so it's extremely important to us, and we won't tolerate people who don't adhere to the rules on privacy.
This questioner, who happens to be Andrew Gross of ABC News, asks, a recent GAO report found that the IRS system for administering its own money was so bad that auditors found unresolved cash differences of $63 million. Given that many Americans are scrambling today to finish their tax forms and account for every penny, how can you explain not being able to account for $63 million?
Well, the good news for me is it didn't happen on my watch. It was part of a fiscal year 1992 audit, financial statement audit, the General Accounting Office conducted. We have taken a number of steps to assure that that will not happen again. And I have also said that I think we have a right, our taxpayers have a right to expect that the Internal Revenue Service will keep its books and records in the very same type of form that we would expect them to. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that we have a clean audit in the future. And I might add, we're being successful at it as well.
What categories of people are found to try to cheat in their taxes the most? Don't mention the reporters. We already know about that.
Well, I think the vast majority of the American people do not cheat on their taxes, and I think they really do try very hard to comply with the laws. I don't know that you can generalize to a category of people or to any one industry or profession. I think it's clear that where people deal in cash, it's much easier not to report things and not to have them found. So that's an area where there's a fair amount of probably underreporting.
In the past, there have been reports that incumbent administrations have used the IRS to strike against or harass political opponents or critics. What assurance is there that this is not possible now?
Well, I think that since the 1970s, I see Commissioner Alexander here, who's was commissioner when I was there in my earlier life. I think that I think every commissioner, and even before that, has taken the position that this is not a partisan system. We have done everything we can to assure that it is apolitical. I think we've been very successful. I do think that the system is administered largely by career people. I'm the only political appointee in the agency, and I think that we are very conscious of protecting this agency from any type of concerns about political abuse, and I think as long as I'm commissioner, we will continue to do that. But we have a fine tradition that goes back at least to the early 60s.
Somewhat related to that, this question says, in the past, many organized crime leaders were apprehended for tax fraud. Is the agency still involved in that type of policing? Why? Why not? What is the budget for that?
We like to say it took an accountant to catch Al Capone. We are still very much involved in policing tax fraud. We have almost 3,000 special agents who are trained criminal investigators. They work a number of tax fraud cases, and we are ever vigilant, hopefully, to try to track down and ferret out people who are trying to commit tax crimes. So we certainly have, we don't have a lot of publicity about it, as in most law enforcement agencies don't, but we are a very active criminal enforcement program.
A small group of congressmen, including Congressman Sam Gibbons of Florida, has recommended doing away with the income tax and replacing it with a value-added tax because it would be so much simpler. It would actually eliminate whole groups of jobs, such as tax attorneys. What do you think of that as a tax expert? Would a value-added tax save so much money by doing away with the Internal Revenue Service and the and all the everything related to income taxes that it would be the better way to go?
I think that the value-added tax or consumption tax or alternatives to income taxes are things that always need to be looked at and discussed. I personally do not think that they would necessarily be easier to administer. I think that a lot of people view those as a panacea for concerns about compliance. Talking to my counterparts around the world who have to administer some of those systems has convinced me that they are not without their problems, and very serious problems. So I think if we're looking at some of these as a panacea for enforcement, we'd be making a mistake. I think that also it's terribly important to have a debate about how people are taxed, and I think that we do have an excellent income tax system. As I said, it could be better, but I think right now we're not quite ready to replace it with a consumption tax, and I'm not sure that it would be a very practical thing to do in the short term.
This questioner says, or asks, what's user-friendly about the automated collection service, ACS, having caller ID on their phones? This scares off a lot of callers who just call to see what their options are to make payment plans, or even to call to say they wanted to contest a notice. Are you even familiar with that?
No, well, I am familiar with the automated collection service. I do not believe it has caller ID on it, so I believe that question is inaccurate. And I'm getting confirmation from people who would definitely know.
Okay. You can call now, and all you have to do now is muffle your voice, and they won't know who you are.
Yes, whoever asked the question, though, if they'd like to meet me afterwards, I'd be happy to.
Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa has proposed allowing taxpayers to recommend a percentage distribution of their tax dollars to specific federal expenditures. Is this feasible?
Whether it may be systemically feasible, I think that, however, that is a debate that really Congress should take up and make a decision about how the money is spent. What we do is try to administer the law and collect it. How it's spent is really a decision for the elected officials to make, along with the administration.
Now, there's a lot of people, especially journalists, but many people are having home offices now. But every time you go to your tax accountant and say, I want to deduct money for my home office, they say, oh, you do that, you're asking for an audit. So this questioner wants to know, is it true that a personal computer or home-based office is a red flag for the IRS? Are there red flags that automatically issue or trigger audits?
There may be some red flags that automatically trigger audits, but unfortunately I'm not at liberty to discuss them.
You're going a little fast for me there. Oh, here's a good one for Clinton administration officials. What help can you offer for 942 filers? Household help, including babysitters' wages. I believe less than 10% of these filers can't do it themselves, and ADP and paychecks, the payroll service bureaus won't do them. They can't make money on them. You know, you catch the drift of that thing. It goes on and on.
That is an area where we are working to try to come up with some simpler rules and simpler solutions. I see my colleague Les Samuels is here. There are some legislative proposals to try to simplify the provisions for household employees, and I hope that we'll be able to make some strides in that whole area this coming year. I think there's also a legitimate concern, though, that people not be dropped out of the system who really need to benefit from Social Security. So a number of people have suggested to me that why don't you just take everybody out of the system if they make less than a certain amount of money. And that, I think, is not really what the Social Security system's all about. So there are really some policy issues that need to be addressed as well. What we're trying to do, though, is try to make the forms and the process as easy as possible.
Okay. Does raising or lowering taxes retroactively, as has happened this year, complicate the task of the tax collection?
No.
Have you gotten a lot of complaints from people whose taxes have been retroactively raised?
Only from my husband.
Okay. Oh, boy, we're doing well here. Have you filed your tax return yet, and do you have somebody else do it? And if so, why did you spend all that money on the expensive education to have someone else file your taxes?
We do have somebody who helps us with our return, and just to make sure that we have done everything to the letter of the law, and it will be in the mail in a timely fashion.
What percentage of taxpayers are randomly audited each year?
I'm not sure that I have the number on that specific, that would be directly responsive to that question, but our audit coverage is overall somewhere just in excess of 1%. However, there are various categories where the audit coverage is much higher than 1%, and other categories where it is less than that, but I'm not sure I can really respond directly to that question.
This question wants to know, how long will it take the stereotypes of the IRS as an incompetent bully to subside?
Well, I'm hoping that is not the stereotype, so I hope that that's a view shared by just a small minority of people. I think that we do, as I said earlier, process a lot of paper. We have contacts with many people over the course of the year, and I think I would match our record for professional and accurate service against any other service organization. What I said earlier about their size makes even a small percentage of the people we deal with, if their problems turn into a major problem. And so I think the vast majority of people who are involved in tax administration are extremely competent, very dedicated, and I think they really do seek to try to collect the proper amount of taxes, no more and no less.
The IRS withholds tax refunds from parents who are negligent on child support. Is this system working, and does the agency withhold funds for any other purpose?
There is a refund offset program whereby I think there are almost 30 different kinds of debts that people might owe to the federal government that can be offset against a tax refund. And student loan is another example. You mentioned child support. There are a number of different programs, federal programs, where people are indebted to the federal government, owe them money, and if there is a refund, it will automatically be offset against the refund.
This questioner says, accountants, and I am one, all talk about how understaffed. There aren't enough of them, and vast numbers of in Philadelphia are young GS2s. Your collection efforts, you're too understaffed for your collection efforts. Do you believe you could get Congress to see this, and could Congress vote in a bigger collections effort and still get reelected?
The last question, I think, is a political question I probably couldn't answer, but we have had very strong support for our budget from the current administration. We're hoping, as I said earlier, to maintain the staffing level we have today. What we do anticipate is being able to handle a larger workload, or our growing workload, because we can work more efficiently and effectively. And many of the very labor-intensive jobs that we're doing today are going to be taken over by technology, and we're planning to redeploy the people who are working in those jobs into other frontline compliance jobs. I think that we will have the resources we need, and I'm confident we'll have the resources we need to do the job we have to be able to do.
This questioner says, how about eliminating the 1040A and 1040E2 forms and just sending these filers a bill or a refund? How is the, I think that's...
Well, by April 15th in the year 2000, if you invite me back, I'll be happy to tell you, I hope I'll be able to tell you that's what we're going to be able to do. That we very much would like to be able to eliminate tax filing or tax forms filed by a large number of taxpayers who will, are currently filing either the 1040A or the 1040EZ, which are our simplest and most straightforward forms. And I think it's eminently doable.
The Clinton administration and Congress were supportive of IRS upgrades last year with sufficient budget allocations. Will that be true this year, too?
Well, the budget that was submitted to Congress in January was a budget that supported all of the needs that we had, and again supported actually an increase of 2,000 in our staffing. So we're hopeful, working with Congress, that we will have the resources that we need to carry out our mission. But we've had excellent support from the administration.
This questioner wants to know, what was the toughest tax case you handled in private practice? No need to cite any names.
I'm not sure I can single out what the toughest one was, to be honest.
No?
No, I'm not sure I can think of what the toughest one was. There were a number of tough issues that came along, but I'm not sure I could characterize what the toughest one was.
Okay. You said there's going to be a lot more enforcement. What can you do? You get this $170 billion of uncollected taxes. What are the things you can do to locate that money, especially for the underground economy?
I think one of the things that technology is going to allow us to do, and is allowing us to do, is have one, more accurate reporting, but also more timely reporting. Currently, we do match information documents. We're not matching them, though, in what we call real time. In the IRS of the future, maybe many of the information documents will be online, and by the time you file your return, if you have to file a return, we'll have that information, match it virtually instantaneously, and before a refund or a bill is sent, we'll know exactly what is owed. Today, because of the time lag, circumstances change, people get away, people fall through the system. We'll be able to, I think, do things on a much more timely basis, which is going to help us considerably.
Okay. Let's see here. Before asking the final question, I'd like to thank you for appearing here today. I'd like to present you with a National Press Club mug for which you can toast in the April 15th deadline, and a certificate of appreciation for being here, and my tax return. Now there's a check in here for $59, and I want you to promise me that you'll tell Bill not to spend that all in one place.
I'm actually going to give this back to Gil so he can make sure it gets in the mail himself. I want everyone to see this.
It goes back. I was going to take it back. Don't worry. I wasn't going to leave that to get lost somewhere between here and...
He's heard about my briefcase.
That's right. How did April 15th become the tax day anyway? When was that established as the tax day?
I think originally March 15th was tax day, and sometime to give people a little bit more time to get their records together, and accountants and tax attorneys a little bit more time to prepare it. It was moved to April 15th, I think, in the after World War II or during World War II, around that time.
Is there a better date that you could think of?
Couldn't think of a better date. No.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for appearing here today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Just a reminder that audio and video tapes of this can be had by calling 1-800-500-9911, and we certainly appreciate you being here. We hope you all come back very shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Nice to see you. Thank you.